knowing that justice has run its course in this tragedy.
Her youngest son, Dexter, testified his father's death is a tragedy which still remains a mystery for him.
And it has always been a feeling that there are many unanswered questions that have not been addressed.
Dexter was only 6 when his father was shot and killed in Memphis. This man, James Earl Ray, confessed to the crime. Although he recanted the confession days later, he was sentenced to 99 years in jail without ever having a trial.
In a prison hospital in Nashville, Tennessee today, another remarkable moment of a different kind altogether. This was a face-to-face meeting between the son of the late Martin Luther King Jr. and the man who is serving a 99-year sentence for his assassination. Here's NBC's Frederica Whitfield.
Dexter King arrived at this Nashville prison to meet the man serving time for the death of his father, Dr. Martin Luther King.
Long anticipated visit.
The youngest son wanted to look into the eyes of a terminally ill James Earl Ray and ask one question in particular.
Did you kill my father?
No, I didn't know.
And then King offered this.
I believe you, and my family believes you, and we are going to do everything in our power to try and make sure that justice will prevail.
Their meeting became a 1-hour friendly encounter. King and Ray sat only 3 feet across from one another. King listened intently to a frail 69-year-old Ray who was battling liver disease. They talked briefly about Ray's health and of hope that the courts will soon give Ray the trial he never had. In 1969, Ray confessed to killing Dr. King, but later recanted, saying he was framed. Over the years, Ray has tried unsuccessfully to get a trial. Last February, the King family testified in Memphis to help reopen the case. An appellate court is now considering the request. Prison doctors have said without a liver transplant, Ray has only months to live, and no donor has been made available. That continues to heighten the King family's concern. Ray may never tell his version of the truth in court. After the meeting, King said it was a success.
I can now feel somewhat relieved that, you know, I heard with my own ears, I saw with my own eyes, not relying on a third party.
He said it was an experience the King family hoped would bring some closure, and Dexter King says for him, it did. Frederica Whitfield, NBC News, Nashville.
Dexter King, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Take me back to the moment when you reached out and shook James Earl Ray's hand. What was that like?
It was very moving, a feeling of relief to finally meet face-to-face with the man who has been accused, but has since, from the beginning, said he was innocent. I continue to hear that he confessed, and in fact, he didn't confess. He pled guilty, which is different, technically speaking.
So when you asked him, did you kill my father, in no uncertain terms, and he said, no, I did not, why do you believe him?
Well, I believe him because there's so much new evidence that has been presented to me and my family vis-a-vis his attorney, Bill Pepper. Also, the fact of the matter is, he has said from the beginning he was innocent. I asked him why he pled guilty. He said basically his attorney at the time cut a deal behind the scenes with the district attorney, and unbeknownst to him, he was forfeiting his rights to a trial. As soon as he found that out, 3 days later, he recanted and has since been trying to get a trial. So, spiritually speaking, I felt very moved by the meeting, because for me and my family, it brings us closer to the process of reconciliation, healing, and ultimately closure.
You mentioned your family. Your mother, Coretta Scott King, was not at the meeting. I'm sure you talked to her afterward. What was her impression?
Well, she felt it was a very courageous thing to do for all of us. I mean, I think spiritually speaking, my family was there. They were not there in the flesh, but physically, but spiritually very much supportive. I think everybody felt proud of the fact that we were now closer firsthand, not through hearsay or third-party representatives, but closer to getting at this truth.
Dexter King's 1997 meeting with the man imprisoned for killing his father was a breakthrough in James Earl Ray's long fight to be heard. But many saw it as a bizarre, disturbing footnote to a great tragedy. 1 week after the meeting, on the eve of the 29th anniversary of the assassination, today's Matt Lauer spoke with Pulitzer Prize-winning King biographer David GARROW.
You said that the scene of James Earl Ray and Dexter King shaking hands was, quote, sad and surreal. Why?
Yes, Matt. I think it's very sad that the King family and the King children are so uninformed of the history that they could be open to believing that Mr. Ray was not involved in Dr. King's assassination. Mr. Ray was someone of long-standing racist, segregationist affiliations, and as the House Assassinations Committee very correctly concluded 19 years ago, Mr. Ray was probably the trigger man for a wider segregationist conspiracy to kill Dr. King.
But Dexter King and his family members are not the only people who've been asking questions for the last 29 years. If there are some doubts, why is it a betrayal to Dr. King's legacy to meet James Earl Ray face to face and at least try and get some answers to those questions?
Unfortunately, Matt, we can find people who will deny that slavery was bad for Afro-Americans. People will deny that the Holocaust happened in Europe. Unfortunately, people just don't have a good enough historical recollection of how many times, how thoroughly this has been investigated. Mr. Ray testified for 3 days on live national television in 1978, and I think it's fair to say, made a laughingstock of himself.
Mr. Garrow,
Mr. Ray could tell the truth if he chose to.
All right, hang on for 1 second, because joining us now is Dexter King. Dexter, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Mr. Garrow seems to think that you and your family members are being duped by James Earl Ray and his attorneys. What's your reaction?
Well, I am very disturbed by his comments that anyone in this day and age of victims' rights would suggest that it is wrong for a family to question who killed their loved one. The fact of the matter is, I guess I'm really not surprised, because Mr. Garrow, for whatever reason, is doing his job. And frankly, he is an agent for those forces of suppression who do not want this truth to come forward.
Unfortunately, the King family has not looked at the record that the House Assassinations Committee compiled 19 years ago. There's really no dispute among people that know this history well about Mr. Ray's guilt. The real questions that we should be pursuing and that Mr. King should be putting to Mr. Ray are who encouraged and who funded Mr. Ray to kill Martin Luther King Jr. That should be our focus.
Dexter?
I think what is really appalling here is that Mr. Garrow has built a platform on exploiting my father's legacy. If it were not for my family, Mr. Garrow would not have gained access to my father's papers and many other things that have given him a platform to speak out. And to now come back and say that we're misinformed is totally appalling.
What we have here, and what people need to remember, is that Mr. Ray, like other segregationist terrorists from the 1960s, did a tremendous amount of harm to the black freedom struggle. And for Mr. King to be misled into believing in mafia conspiracies is so unfortunately ignorant of the real history.
Dexter?
I met Mr. Ray. He is not a segregationist. I've met segregationists. This man was not born in the South as the media portrayed at the time. The fact of the matter is he was born in Illinois. I met his family. They are not people who strike me as racist. The fact of the matter is this man was set up, and we need to deal with this so that we can move on. The American public deserves the right to know. Certainly the family of the victim deserves the right to know what happened to their loved one. We need to stop living in denial in this country.
Dexter?
And for once and for all, face this injustice.
The Reverend Jesse Jackson agrees somewhat with Mr. Garrow in saying that James Earl Ray does not deserve a trial until he begins to tell the truth, among other things saying that Raoul never existed. Would you at least agree with that he does need to tell a little bit more of the truth before a trial is warranted?
Well, first of all, Raoul has been located. As I said, there are so many people who are talking about this case as if they're informed. They are the ones that are uninformed. They do not have the up-to-date latest information.